What if I told you to embrace nuclear and reject renewables? Both ask, huh? And what if I told you that that's what we actually need to do to ensure a good future for humanity on this planet? Sounds bonkers? Well, it isn't. The thing with nuclear is that a lot of people oppose it. For some reason. And now we are gonna look at why, because it's really important to understand this major fuck up in our history. So, nuclear has been around for some 80 years now. The idea of nuclear power began in the 1930s when physicist Enrico Fermi first showed that neutrons could split atoms. In 1942, his team achieved the first nuclear chain reaction under a stadium at the University of Chicago. First, as you might know, it was used to blow stuff up, but with the progress in technology, people were able to control the chain reaction and to use it as a steady energy generator. It was supposed to give us a utopian future, something like hydrogen or fusion today. But then, in 1979, a movie called The China Syndrome premiered, and that sort of marked the start of the downfall of nuclear. The movie was released on March 16th and covered a catastrophe in a fictional power plant in the US. Funny thing is that only 12 days after that, on March 28th, the 3 Mile Island power plant in Pennsylvania experienced a partial meltdown of its second reactor. This made the movie quite fucking popular, but the same thing can't be said about nuclear power plants. Then, in 1986, Chernobyl happened, so people really lost their shit. After 20-something years, the sentiment about nuclear was becoming sort of positive again, so somebody said to themselves that it would be a good idea to build a nuclear power plant in a tectonic active area on a shore. Like, of course we are gonna build it here, what could possibly go wrong? Long story short, in 2011, Fukushima happened. Based on this, Germany decided to phase out all of their nuclear power plants till December 22, which is now, but due to the Russian bullshit going on, it wouldn't be very wise to phase out their only clean and reliable source of electricity, so they've stopped the phasing out. And here we are! End of 2020. Some people still don't seem to like nuclear, even though it's the reason why they have light every time they turn the switch on. So, that was the brief and sad history, but now let's look at something else. Funny thing is that the term nuclear doesn't mean only fission, which everybody uses it for, but also fusion, which almost nobody uses it for. So, embrace nuclear, reject renewables doesn't necessarily mean we have to build uranium reactors, even though we probably should to deal with the climate change and energy crisis. Instead, we can just build sort of a stove that you put hydrogen in, burn it, and get helium plus a metric shitload of energy out of it. There isn't any radioactivity going on, no GHG emissions, no risk of a nuclear accident, none of that stuff. Plus, here comes the best part, fusing atoms in a controlled way releases nearly 4 million times more energy than a chemical reaction such as the burning of coal, oil or gas, and 4 times as much as nuclear fission reactions. So the fusion sounds great, but there is a bit of an issue on the execution side of things. We can't do it properly in a controlled environment yet. I mean, it works in space, but what the scientists were struggling most for the past many years was generating more energy from the reaction than they have to add to it to make it work. I said struggled because that's finally over. On December 5th, 2022, a team from DOE's Livermore lab made history by achieving the first fusion ignition. Fusion ignition is the point at which a nuclear fusion reaction becomes self-sustaining. It's still gonna be a few years till fusion is viable, but we are one step closer to literally the cleanest source of energy that we can get. It's even cleaner than hydroelectric, solar and wind. because the amount of materials you need to build a fusion reactor isn't that big. I mean, it's just a normal power plant building with stuff in it, and you get almost infinitely more energy from a much smaller building footprint than if one were to use the materials to build, for example, a solar farm. Let me now say the main reason why renewables aren't that great. Sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow. I know you knew that already, but this is really important. Renewable energy sources are very volatile, so they need something to balance the production out. The way it's done now involves coal, natural gas and other stuff, which the big spooky oil companies are aware of and capitalize on it. So if there is a shortage of electricity, for example in the US because it's cloudy right now or something, engineers simply turn on the coal or gas plants to meet the demand. And it works like this everywhere, except for France. There is one specific reason for it. Fission power plants are usually firing on all cylinders and nobody is playing around with them. But they weren't designed only for this use case. You see, the engineers envisioned that their technology is going to take over the whole energetic sector, and that would mean that the power plants would have to be flexible with their energy production output. So, the plants are flexible with their energy production output. But the only country where nuclear really took over the sector is France, with over 70% of electricity coming from fission, so they balance the fission plants out with renewable sources. But as already said, France is the only country where this is practiced on a meaningful scale. So in all other lands, coal and natural gas are still burned when there is an electricity shortage. And I find this fact to undermine the CO2 neutrality of renewables by a tiny little bit. We could exchange the coal and gas for nuclear, but the problem is I don't think there is gonna be much wiggling around with the production output of a fusion reactor. I may be wrong, but if we look at the sun, it's been firing non-stop ever since my grandpa was around, and that's a long fucking time. Plus, to address the climate change and stuff, we have to transform the whole energetic sector. Not just electricity. I hear everyone talking about power plants, but nobody, except for Kurzgesagt, seems to mention that people consume a lot of energy, but electricity can be, for example, only 1/3 of that. The other 2/3 consist mainly of heat for buildings and fuel for cars. For example, Austria, a country that's big on renewables, consumed 335 terawatt-hours of energy in 2019. But electricity was only 73 terawatt-hours from that. The buildings and cars were powered by fossil fuels, nothing renewable. This means that to achieve the carbon neutrality by 2050 or whatever, we'll have to electrify as many industries as possible and generate all of the electricity from CO2 neutral sources. And this means that the electricity demand is going to spike massively in the next 10 to 20 years. So all things considered, there may come a day when we'll have to decide between renewables and fusion. And based on the facts that we know now, it would be really dumb to choose renewables. Thanks for watching. And this means that the electricity demand